All set?
That's how
All
it
right,
works.
can people hear me?
Yeah. Hi,
Great.
everyone. Welcome to the Philosophical Center. We're so glad to have you here with Gavin Wilhite, who most of you know is one of the founders of AltSpace. We are here because of the magic that he created the foundation. He and his partners created the foundation that we have built on top of. And we're thrilled to um, be able to give you the stage to speak to us. Uh, and I would like to open it up. I know you said that you're willing to do a little Q&A before you tell your story.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes here, so yeah, maybe we take 2 or 3 questions before we start. Yeah.
Okay,
Any
so
burning
I'm going to
questions?
do a
Burning
host
questions
panel.
about
And
Altspace.
if you guys have burning questions, everybody keeps saying they have burning questions. So you'll see a little hand raise on the lower corner. And if you want to raise your hand and ask Gavin a question, you're welcome to. Anybody? Bueller? Anybody? Okay, we have one. Scott, you have the megaphone.
Hey, I'm right here in the front. Thanks for hosting this event. I
Totally.
can't wait to hear what's said. I guess, I don't know if this is a tough question. I mean, just feel free to skip. I'm just curious. Like, I'm assuming that because there's not a party like taking over maintenance of Altspace, that the it's like there's some IP involved or something. But like, isn't there like an earlier build or some way to like make it saleable so somebody could continue to maintain and host it?
It's I will definitely say that the question has been, discussed. I don't think that there's a don't think that there's. I wouldn't get hopes up on that. Unfortunately, I think Microsoft is hard. It's hard with these big companies. But so by all means, put some community pressure if you like. I'm not advocating, but you know the. But I would say at this point in time it's pretty tough with where it's at. But you know
Yeah.
what? Sometimes things happen.
Cece, you're hearing a loud
Yep.
breathing noise.
This is
Thank
an
you for the question,
opportunity
guys.
for us to build and grow elsewhere and try new things. And what
It's
really
getting
makes
really
this
bad.
place beautiful is the community.
Yes.
Marion Goodell, when she canceled Burning Man, she said you can't actually cancel Burning Man. You can only cancel Black Rock City. And so Microsoft might be canceling AltSpace, but they're not canceling us. They're not
Mm.
canceling what we built. They're not canceling our knowledge. We get to take this somewhere else and grow. And I hope that everybody does that.
You're here. You're here.
Here, here.
Right.
Admiral, you have the megaphone.
Yes, I would like to know just a practical question. So, how much time did it take from the conception of AltSpace as a
Oh.
product and the first user? And then, how long will it take to switch AltSpace off so we can't come on anymore? And then, third, how long would it take to turn AltSpace back on if that were in the cards?
That's a great question.
Wow.
Yeah. Let me at least onto the spirit of it. Yeah. So to start with, how long did it take to the first user? That's a great question. So I will say I'm going to give Eric credit where credit's due here. He was kind of the business guy, and he created a functional Unreal demo on the yeah, the Oculus Kickstarter project that he was using to raise angel funds before even I came on. And so there was people using it with Eric's scrappy little Unreal Engine demo. Um, but for the actual sort of main Unity client, I'd have to go back and look at it, but I want to say maybe like 6 months or something like that. But you know what? From like day zero, it's funny. The um, first build that we had literally had a pyramid for a body, and you had a pyramid for a head. So you could sort of tell where the head was looking, and like from day zero, it was networked, right? So, it's you got to start with what's valuable.
Oh, so that's interesting. So do you think the AltSpace logo, did you guys design that from the pyramid avatar
That's really
look?
funny. I hadn't thought about that, but you know what? It probably was in our heads. It probably was.
So it was like an
but,
honoring that we've maintained of those very first avatars.
Yeah, and then the questions on shutting it down and bringing it back. Again, I have no knowledge about Microsoft stuff. A lot of the backend has changed since we had it. Um, you know, it's surprisingly difficult sometimes to turn these systems back on if you don't have the original engineers once you've turned it off. I think in this case, a lot of the backend, and I don't know this, is Microsoft has been trying to build this sort of VR backend, right? And I have no insider knowledge of it at this point in time, but it's interesting. I really do hope, and if people make their voices heard here, I mean, I hope that Microsoft is willing to bring something back that looks like this. But you know what? If not, go make your own. There's a Bender quote from Futurama that I would want to say here, but I don't think I'm going to curse on stage or whatever.
Please do.
You can curse on stage. Fuck it.
Yeah, well,
Make your own
anyway,
world.
go make your own.
Bender.
I believe the quote is yeah. With blackjack. Why don't we put it that way? Yeah.
It's just the blackjack.
Yeah.
Great. Any other
so-
questions here?
Yeah. Steph, you have the megaphone.
Yes, I was wondering, there are people that are trying to recreate this right now as we speak. And can you give them any advice or ray of hope or anything to go on from your experience?
I do want to give a solid shout out to when AltspaceVR was closing the first time. There was a contingent that went off with the Microsoft acquisition to Microsoft. There was, and these are unofficial, right? This isn't an official thing, but there was a contingent that went off to Facebook, now Meta, to create Horizons. Then there was also a contingent that went over to Mozilla to make Hubs. And they made a lot of really, really valuable open source contributions on this stuff. And not only is Hubs continuing to do really cool work, but my technical co-founder at AltspaceVR, the sort of my co-director who did a lot of the backend services, who also led that project at Hubs, has been working on his own thing called Web Spaces. I think it's webspaces.space. And it's really, really cool. And he's put a lot of hard work into the backend systems there. So I think the main thing I would say is go look to see if any of this open source stuff is useful. Then, also just I don't know, try to grab some of the spirit of it, right? Like the emojis are great, the life, the vibrancy. I think there's a lot just, stylistically to take from AltspaceVR. The last thing I'll say on that too is that, when we started AltspaceVR, the emotion that I thought that we were going to be trying to channel for people was like power and being a badass, right? I'd seen The Matrix and everybody thinks about these things, and then it became pretty obvious within the first maybe 6 months of it being in people's hands that emotion that really people were coming to AltspaceVR to have, or just this sort of feeling, was that of social laughter, just sort of laughing and enjoying themselves with other people. And so I think that would be the last thing that I would say on that, is just try to channel that if you're making one of these services. So
Well, look at all the emojis. We got social laughter right there.
I love it.
Oh my God, I
cool.
love this. You guys did the emojis. That's still here, right?
That was also Greg. Yeah. Yeah.
What about flying? Are you the ones that gave us flight, or
flying.
did that come later?
That might have been Patrick. I don't know. Patrick was definitely the one that did a lot of the grabbing of stuff and the interaction system. There's so many people to give shout outs here too. But, yeah, it was an awesome team that put this together. So, and that's the other thing too. Oh God, I would be telling here just off the cuff stories for a long time, but that company culture is so critical. That's one of the things that still makes me the most proud of what we did, is that people say that it set a bar for company culture. They just have very low tolerance for office bullshit these days, because you build it right, you can kind of
Yeah.
So anyway,
You guys built it right. You really did. You built it right. Kudos to you.
appreciate it.
Your
A lot of that was
team,
speaking too. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
all of you. It takes a village.
yeah.
I have a
It does.
question from E Echoes.
I think this is probably the last one before we start, but that sounds
Okay,
good.
last question.
I was unmuting myself. Um, what was your favorite part of this whole process in both like a general sense and also like in a particular one? Like which one was your favorite world? Like the most impressive world that you've seen?
Okay, so let's see here. Okay, most impressive is hard, but the one that stands out in my memory, I will share. And then the first part of the question was one more time. It was
In a more general sense, which one was your favorite part? Like the community, the people, the world, or
well, okay. So honestly, the most favorite part for me is like, and this is true in startups, but it's also true in Burning Man camps and stuff like that, right? Is like building that team of the people that you really want to be spending like every day with. When you can do that in a startup and a Burning Man camp, it's just so cool. You just and that was definitely one of my favorite parts. And then just one really memorable instance in here of kind of somebody creating something. There's so many things, right? But there was we used to host these developer meetups, right? Where people would come with these new apps, and I think the way that you built apps changed a little bit after the Microsoft stuff, but it was basically like, we had this holographic sort of web browser, right, and these A-frame extensions, and they could sort of like add these holographic objects into the room, but they couldn't really interact with it too much. Eventually, we made the things where you could kind of have like static physics bodies, right, that you could kind of climb on and stuff. So we're at this developer meetup, and this guy's like, so basically he would send you the URL, and then I would drop it in, and it would kind of spit the app up into space. And so he said, okay, let me show this app off. So I plug it in here, and he goes, okay, watch this. And he just walks over, he just grabs onto the wall. He starts climbing up the wall, and we didn't have flying in here or anything. And he just starts scaling this wall. And I'm like, how are you doing this? And what he had done is he had ripped the level out of the Unity asset bundle so that he could have a physics representation of it, layered that on top of the existing space. Then he could tell when your hand was colliding with the wall. Then he would spawn an invisible box beneath your feet, lifting you up at the exact same rate as your grabbing the wall, so that he made it so you could climb the walls in AltspaceVR. That one definitely goes down. It's a very good one.
Super creative. Well, I hope you have time in the next 40 days to hop in and out of these worlds and see what these creators have done since then. Because the creativity is otherworldly, truly mind-blowing, and I'm amazed by all of you every single day. So I'm going to give you the stage, and yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so I put a few thoughts together to share, and basically I'm going to be telling sort of 3 different stories today that kind of are at the intersection of kind of AltSpace and Burning Man, or sort of Burning Man culture. And a lot of this has come from, I've been thinking a lot about this concept of sort of like systems and stories over the last few years, and like, these are the things that I like kind of care about in my work. And like, it's interesting, right? Because you set out to like build these systems in a lot of ways, or at least I do, right? You're like, okay, I want to help build a awesome social VR platform, right? And it has to be able to do this, that, and the other thing. Like in the end, like is more than half of the value that I've seen in this stuff is like, it's not necessarily in the bits, it's not in the capabilities, it's not in what you can do with it. It's not the system, it's the stories that come after it, come out of it. And those are the things that last a lot longer than the systems do, and I think that this is true, like, not only in sort of like digital systems like this, right? But it's true for like civilizations, and it's like true for like biological systems like people, right? Like the stories, outlive the people in many ways. I'm probably gonna cry doing this. Just forgive me up front. But you know, and I think that this is absolutely true for AltSpace, right? Like we told a couple stories here, but like never would have imagined like the things that people would have used this for. First time that I heard that they hosted like an LGBT, you know, plus meetup here where like people were able to be like out with somebody, you know, like face to face, you know, logging in from countries where like they could never do that. Like they would find themselves in really serious trouble if they were out to anybody else. And they were able to do that here. Uh, you know, another story that stands out was like we had this hedge maze, and I hope that it's still around, but like you had this hedge maze that you would walk through, and you know, just landing there and having it was one guy from sort of the deep south with like a very deep southern drawl and somebody else from like the Netherlands or something, and just us wandering through this hedge maze together, right? And like not only were you able to hang out with people from so many different places, but you're also able to hang out with people from so many different places who might not otherwise travel, right? That was just this whole other degree of sort of like cultural interaction where you have to, you know, explore, you know, personal space and how does that work with different cultures and all this kind of stuff. Um, yeah, it's just like reflecting on just AltSpace, it's just always the stories, right? And so, in sort of the spirit of this there's two characteristics of these stories that they have in common is they're both sort of in some ways about kind of like ephemerality, right? And I thought, you know, one of the things that was very interesting, at least personally, about this concept of ephemerality was like when I was helping to start AltSpace, like I was very big into like transhumanism, and like thought that there was a good chance that I might be immortal someday. Like, and like this went so far as to be like literally asked our HR lady if we could bump up our life insurance policy so that people could use it to pay for cryonics. And bless her heart, she said no. It was probably the best wise decision. But like this was the kind of headspace that I was in, right? And you know, I still root for these people, right? Like, you know, if they get breakthroughs on this, that's great. But I've learned a lot of appreciation for sort of mortality and these arcs, sort of in the meantime, and like how, you know, kind of being accepting of the fact that some of these things do have arcs to them, like lets you kind of like accept them with a little bit more grace, right? And you know, it everybody should be proud of the arc that we had here. You know, it would be nice if this went on longer, but this thing has been around for 8 years now, and that's really really cool. It's really cool. And everybody here is to be thanked for that, right? Because first time it was going down, it was literally the community that saved it. It was literally the community that saved it. It was those stories. It was the acoustic guitar songs that people wrote, right? This is why Microsoft got off the debt and helped this thing live on. So that's the sort of the first aspect of these stories. And then the second one is sort of, you know, this concept of Burning Man, right? And the spirit of this and Burning Man sort of like events. Still don't know whether to call it a festival or not. Maybe that's a debate for another day. But the it's interesting, right? Because these virtual worlds have a lot of storied history with Burning Man, right? A lot of the same personalities that go to the burn also make these virtual worlds, and I think that there's a reason for that, right? Like, you know, it requires sort of like, you know, people who are dreaming of a better world, right? And sort of dreaming like how far can we get away from like default reality, right? And more importantly, like by doing that, can we bring some of those lessons back, you know, to default with us, right? So the first story I wanted to share was when we thought it was shutting down the first time. And so it was a pretty sad day. We kind of the writing was on the wall for maybe just a week or two beforehand. Like, you know, we were struggling for a little bit, but it came down to it where it was a Friday, and Eric had to come in and sit everybody down and give that final speech. And at the very end of it, he just couldn't say any more words, and he just said, "Please go home." You know? And you could tell that he'd been going through a real rough time. And one of the guys, kind of a big dude, you know, he just came up to him and just picked him up and gave him the biggest damn hug you can imagine, right? because people fought really hard for this thing. And so we all went home, and I was trying to figure out whether I wanted to go try to spend like a last weekend. Is there any last, crazy moves to do to save this thing or whatever? But literally, I was scheduled to go to this. It was Burning Man on the Water. It was this different event that was being hosted in California, and so it was either like go like struggle by myself for the weekend to try to like figure out if there's any last Hail Marys, like by myself because all my friends were going to be at this thing, or like go to this crazy Burning Man event. And eventually, I decided I was like, okay, let's go to this thing, and I was there on the edge of this houseboat, just crying, like, just trying to process this thing. And a guy walked up next to me and leaned on the rail with me and asked me what was going on. Eventually, I learned that this guy was Brewster Kahle. He was, he's the founder, I think, of the Internet Archive. And we talked about what does it mean for these things to be built and to die, right? Or to go away, and how do you preserve them? And he really helped. He really helped. And he helped me kind of get my head on straight a little bit, where we were able to do some sort of more proactive things going after that, right? And try to help make the Mozilla thing happen, and, help to, a little bit to get this Microsoft thing to go. But I think the one, like, takeaway from me on this too was the, when you're building, prepare for it to like, is there things where we can make sure that we document certain things, or we can make sure that we open source certain things, or we can make sure we have an ongoing blog about our learning, so that if the worst does come to pass, that you are sort of preparing for that. I think Brewster has some really good thoughts on that. Another aspect of this that was really important for me at that time was, and this is something that I also encourage a lot of people here to do too, right? Is like, it was really hard because I had all these dreams in VR and all this kind of stuff, and my avatar and personality and all this kind of stuff. And so that time period and that trip really helped me figure out that, like, a lot of that stuff, like, even though I thought it was AltSpace, it wasn't necessarily that, right? Like, these dreams that people have had, these worlds, right? Like, is not tied to one platform. It really isn't. Like, this is you, right? And this is your community, right? You take that wherever it needs to go. Okay, so the second story. And, kind of before I tell this story, there's somebody in this story who, I think has their road of self-improvement to walk down. But you know what? So do we all, right, in different ways. And I just hope that each and every one of us has that courage to walk that. So there was this offer out from Microsoft, and in particular from Alex Kipman. And I was trying real hard to decide whether to take this or not, because there's kind of a company was going to do it, kind of worked out the deal. There was a hilarious meeting. This is an aside. At one point, I'm sitting in this conference room with like 20 Microsoft lawyers and executives, and they have this big conference screen, and they're talking about all the acquisition stuff. And at one point, it goes to this one slide, and it says Gavin's living room on it. I'm like, what? And it's because we had one single piece of physical hardware asset, which was this box that had the signing keys. It would sign the new builds. And so it was literally sitting in my living room, and they were talking about like the security situation of Gavin's living room, because we didn't have the office anymore. And the other thing that's worth pointing out is that the engineers rebelled. They did not turn off the servers when we were told to turn off the servers, and that's one of the reasons. Somebody asked about how hard it is to turn these things back on when they've been turned off. It's hard. So the engineers said, no, let the bank do it if they really want to. And that's one of the reasons why we had enough runway for the Microsoft acquisition to come through. But anyway, so trying to decide whether to do this Microsoft thing or not, and it's going to involve moving away from my friends, moving up to Seattle. And I knew that, it might have gone through if I wouldn't have participated, but it was going to be hard, right? Because we had a very small skeleton crew. And Burning Man is coming up, and I was like, oh, I've got to make this decision before Burning Man, right? I've got to make a decision before Burning Man. And so eventually what I decided to do was, I knew that Kipman was also a burner. And so I was going to go tell him on Playa that I was going to accept the acquisition, or at least I was going to accept my part in it. And so I had to bike past his camp maybe 2 or 3 times. Eventually, I found him. We both had our faces painted, and I just shook his hand, and I said, "We're gonna make this happen." And that was a very that was one of my most Silicon Valley stories. So I was able to sort of make that happen on the fly up. And then the other thing that happened during that burn was that Keegan and I, she's been the one leading a lot of this at Microsoft. We decided that we were going to meet up at Center Camp and try to plan this out a little bit. And so her and I sat there at Center Camp looking out at the man and took out our notebooks and tried to think through what this was going to look like, how this was going to happen over at Microsoft. Community kept this thing going, and Burning Man played a little bit of a role here too. So the last kind of story that I think I'll tell on this is I went to one of the VR burns in here, and I think it was the last one, but it was one of the VR burning events in Altspace, and I thought it was so cool from so many different ways. One was, the art and everything was incredible. It's beautiful, but there was this moment that I thought was so surreal, where you had these series of speeches, right? And somebody's coming up and he's like, it's all one love. We got to do this as a global community. Like down with capitalism. All this kind of stuff. And then the next guy. It's this juxtaposition, but also this collaboration, right? Between sort of the financial and sort of operational efforts of Microsoft and this community of creators, and it's really hard to do that tastefully. But I think that y'all and sort of that collaboration really pulled it off, and I thought that was pretty inspiring. And I thought one of the reasons why that was inspiring too, right, was because I have some friends who really were not happy with kind of like how the VCs and sort of stuff pulled out at the end with the Altspace thing, and we're just kind of wrote off like, okay, not taking money from folks again, like do this scrappy, all that kind of stuff. But I was thinking about this, right? So I think it's, and I'm gonna use maybe this term is like a little offensive to folks who are, but this term like bean counters, right? And there is truth to the fact that bean counters killed Altspace twice, right? Or shut it down twice basically, right? It's also equally true the bean counters helped this thing live twice. Right? Put the money in, help us build this team, right? And then they also, put the money in to help this thing happen at Microsoft. Right? So there's this nuance. There's this, you got to hold both of these things true at the same time. And that's, I guess, other advice I give people trying to do this again is what? I think there is ways to do this healthy. You can still raise capital, but just be careful, right? Hey, you know what? If you're gonna make another one, I'm gonna say make it a public benefit corporation. These are great. You can raise money the same way. Make it a Delaware PBC. You can have a mission that helps you it gives you legal protection if anybody tries to make you maximize profits over all else. So yeah, give a shout out to those. Oh, and the last thing on just the kind of the financial forces, I started to see them a little bit more as a force of nature. It's winds. You can catch them with your sails. They can also break your masts and stuff like that, right? But trying to put a little bit less morality onto that and just seeing it as a little bit of more of a thing to accept, right? And just kind of either work with or work away from it. Or I do, and, I think just to wrap that up is just, thank you to the BRCVR and just everybody who's been involved in sort of Altspace Burning Man stuff, because this is, it's kind of cool, right? Because this is a dream come true for me. I honestly didn't have too much, I didn't I got this thing off the ground a little bit, but y'all made this, and it's so cool. It really is. It really is. Just close. So in kind of preparing for this talk, I was thinking a little bit about what makes Burning Man beautiful. And there's the principles. We got them on all the walls here, and those are awesome. The people are awesome. The camps are awesome. The art is awesome. The like sort of personal journeys you go through. Awesome. But the thing that was really standing out to me was like, it is the ephemerality in a lot of ways, right? It's the fact that like that you have the knowledge that like the same energy built Burning Man when you went there 2 years ago, the same energy that went into that, gonna happen again, right? It's gonna happen again. You're doing door. So, you guys. Now let's watch some things burn.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was beautiful.